Hi everyone. How are you? We're doing well. Of course, we're angry, like most of you, but considering that, we're doing well. Dolores says, hi all. Troy says, watching on my Fire tablet. Troy says, not bad for $50. That's great. Go Start says, got next. Steve Gonzo. Deborah Wilson says, Joe, every month for months I've tried to donate via Patreon. It never happens. So I've many times tried to redo it. I'm sorry. No, that's okay, Deborah. Thanks for trying. I don't know why you're not able to donate via Patreon. Uh, okay, I'll try to look into that and see why it's not happening. Terry says, great to be here. Great to see you, Dr. F. Your in-depth live stream is a definite winner. So Durbin is trying to step on some necks. Link below. Oh, thank you for the link. I'll look into that here. But later on, I'm very surprised he's trying to step on some necks. He doesn't often do that, does he? Kay says, hi all, glad to see you. We're very glad to see you, Kay. And thank you all for coming. So, the big bill is passed, and we've been over it a bunch of times. Steve Gonzo says, Russia, 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 Russia. Yeah. Hashtag reboot. Yeah, I know that's going on there. Trying some more Russia, 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 Russia. Somehow I don't think it's going to have the same effect this time. Troy says it's almost St. Patrick's Day. How are you, Brian Boru? Pronounced Boru. Who is Brian Boru? Anyway, I am puzzled by who Brian Boru is. But what I want to do is go over some aspects of what is next and then pull it all together as I usually try to do. So let's begin with a piece which appeared in Truthout called The Stimulus Payments, Big Delivery Snafus Need to Be Addressed Now. Yes, they do need to be addressed now. And you're now seeing the article on the screen. There's a picture of a Treasury check. This was written by Barbara Ellis for Truthout on March 13th, 2021. And she points out that now that Joe Biden has signed the third economic stimulus bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, into law, those administering the distribution of the one-time direct payment of $1,400 at the Treasury Department and IRS and their vendors need to ensure the last relief payment does get delivered, even for the, quote, hard to reach, unquote. This was a significant problem with the $1,200 and $600 payments, mostly to recipients in the lower quartile of the 99%, 33 million households who need money the most. They are the demographic instantly buying goods and services, paying rent and mortgages, or paying down debts. The multiplier effect means their purchases fed expenditures of their landlords, utility companies, gas and diesel, service station corporations, banks, supermarkets, and suppliers, thus boosting the economy. Unfortunately, vendors hired by Treasury and IRS to dispense the first two payments to those without bank or credit union accounts failed to deliver. 8 million eligible recipients reportedly didn't get their $1,200 payment last May, indicating many of the same people probably didn't get their $600 in late January. And by the way, Bonnie did not get her $600 payment. They were actually supposed to send us a $1,200 payment. They sent me $600, but didn't send $600 for Bonnie. So we're going to have to try to recoup that through our tax returns this year. So, Treasury funds. By the way, we are banked. We did file a return for 2020. But somehow They didn't have the information. Who knows why? Treasury funds certainly were available for those first two payments. $290 billion for the $1,200. They had no problem getting the first $1,200 to us. $166 billion for the 600. The $456 billion payout was, quote, real money, unquote. As Senator Dirksen, formerly Senator Everett Dirksen, who was a Republican, of Illinois back in the 60s and 70s, was wont to say about federal allocations. Real money. We call that high-powered money. Small wonder, then, that the first distribution of $1,200, starting in March 2020, was followed by the Treasury's stunning admission that, quote, hundreds of thousands, unquote, of checks or prepaid Visa debit cards were unused. This raises the question of whether the Treasury and IRS and their vendors for this crash project tried hard enough to reach the lower third of the U.S.'s 99%. At least one Treasury spokesperson told CNBC that they and the IRS plan to build on, quote, lessons learned over the past year. One successful contact method for thousands of the hard-to-reach, quote unquote, they seem to have bypassed was well-advertised street signups. The Sanders Committee should ensure they do them for the $1,400 payment. I'm not sure that's in the scope of Bernie's authority. The program's second priority was to speed money to the eligible recipient base. That meant individuals with a gross annual income under $75,000 or couples under $150,000. Couples were also set to receive $500 per child under 17. Millions of eligible recipients were in several federal databases that Treasury IRS staffs could have used: tax filings and refund payments, Social Security, supplemental security income, the Railroad Retirement Board, and departments such as Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, Labor, Agriculture, and the Census Bureau. But too many recipients seem to have fallen between the cracks of what should have been a rigorous search despite the short deadline. According to MarketWatch, many of those 8 million people probably fell into 6 categories. The IRS claims it didn't have bank account information on those eligible, even though monthly federal checks were directly deposited. Yeah, how can they not know where Social Security recipients are? But they don't know where Social Security recipients are. It's amazing. Islands of information. They never solved that problem. They may have earned more than payment ceilings. Individuals, $75,000, married couples, $150,000. They were claimed as dependents by others. Creditors directly garnished the bank deposit. But if that happened, I assume the 8 million would have been told about it, right? A complex immigration situation was involved. And finally, IRS had glitches, quote unquote, of sometimes failing to use people's final destination bank, quote unquote. Decades of experience with the public taught the Treasury and IRS that mistakes and misunderstandings would arise, especially for this vast project. So the IRS set up a FAQ website and 2 other service sites: Get My Payment for questions on delivery status and payment mode, and the free non-filers, quote unquote, for those with low or no income. However, the first 2 payment deliveries needed far more than websites, because deliveries were fraught with far more than glitches. Treasury and IRS officials had to begin planning for these distributions as the CARES Act, with the stimulus provision, was moved through Congress. They knew that the Cements project entailed far more than delivering millions of tax refund checks, but they apparently were not about to spend time, energy, payroll expense, printing supplies, and their own U.S. debit cards on those lacking bank or credit union accounts or who don't contribute a penny to tax revenues. Their assignment to distribute those $1,200 payments within a week meant they could only go to the nearly 90 million with direct deposit or regular checking accounts at banks or credit unions. Not the 150 million who lacked those financial credentials or were among the seemingly, quote, hard to find, unquote, with unknown addresses or non-tax filers, 10% of the population, or the homeless 1.5 million. By the way, 10% of the population, non-tax filers, that's 33 million people. Or the homeless, 1.5 million. They would be relegated to deliveries by vendors of financial institutions, which all but guaranteed trouble. If found, recipients with known addresses would get snail mail prepaid, quote, economic impact payment, unquote, commercial debit cards instead of Treasury checks. The Denver Post reported the Treasury chose debit cards because the department lacked the capacity to print millions of EIP checks required quickly. Plastic cards offered a quicker option. That's really amazing, isn't it? That they can create plastic cards more quickly than they can print checks. Who knew? By the way, they printed my check just fine for the first of the income payments. They sent it through the mail. Due to Louis DeJoy, it came 20 days after the date of the check. But actually, to be fair, that was the $600 check. The first check came even later than that. It must have been 6 weeks before it got to us. Anyway, postage costs would be higher. And also deliveries might take a little longer, like late summer, early fall, because of chaos at the U.S. Postal Service caused by its Postmaster General. I'm telling you, that guy should go to federal prison for his trouble. He really should. So much for putting money into the hands of the near destitute quickly. All the problems this guy caused people because he deliberately wanted to destroy the quality of postal service. I mean, he has got to go through a difficult prosecution. And that should happen now, even before he's removed from office. There's nothing stopping prosecution. Nothing stopping prosecution, okay, of Louis DeJoy right now. He is not the president of the United States. There's no Justice Department policy against prosecuting him. So where are you, Merrick Garland? Treasury and IRS explain need for vendors for payment deliveries. To warm up public acceptance of this decision, an IRS spokesperson in late 2020 said to Reuters that, quote, hobbled by budget cuts and obsolete technology, the IRS would likewise struggle with the enormous workload involved in printing and distributing millions of checks and could take months to complete the job, unquote. Action began on April 13th when Treasury officials got the go-ahead to sign contracts with the 3 vendors. I don't understand what was going on between March 23rd. So I recall, wasn't that bill passed on March 23rd or March 25th? What happened between March 25th and April 13th that it took that long for Treasury officials to get the go-ahead to sign contracts with Visa, Fiserv, and Medibank. Those were the three contractors. With respect to Medibank, they would be the overall and sole financial agent working with the Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service, through which taxpayer billions would pour into those prepaid Visa debit cards. But Fiserv was going to provide electronic transaction services for financial institutions. And they would process and produce the Visa cards. So the traffic was going to be directed by Medibank. Fiserv's subsidiary, the Money Network Financial, would design and mail the cards attached to a 2-page information sheet, but for recipients about the card use. And it would also inform them about Medibank fees. It also would handle complaints. Major problems began with 2 vendors almost as soon as the ink was dry on the contract. The first was the presumption that every American had access to computers, the internet, and cell phones. Why didn't they just solve the problem by sending people free computers? But of course, that would assume that they had plugs to use to plug them. Anyway, decision makers at the Treasury, it's really no laughing matter. This is really bumbling. They bumbled and bumbled and bumbled all over this. But decision makers at the Treasury and IRS and the vendors obviously could not conceive targets might not be able to afford them, the internet and the computers and the cell phones, that is. But in this low or no income population, 26% don't own a computer, not counting those who have never used them, or those who do have computers. 77 million still lack adequate broadband services for the internet. Why? Because it's been a long time since there was a real infrastructure bill in the United States. So how could they possibly find information from Treasury, IRS websites, or these vendors? So you're getting the picture. I'm going to skip over much of the rest of it. There were lots of slips between the cup and the lip. They weren't able to get the payments out to 8 million people. In Barbara Ellis's case, $1,200 and $600 payments could be transferred to bank or credit union accounts, a path probably used by millions of card recipients like her. However, her credit union's nearest branch was 30 miles away, so she had to drive 30 miles. The third problem was the mailer's design and Money Network's 2-page informational sheet containing the attached Visa card. Now, the Treasury stores billions of those familiar envelopes containing federal checks. Seemingly, they could quickly resupply if needed. The return address always arrests instant attention because it says, quote, Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service, unquote, over the ominous line, quote, official business / penalty for private use, $300, unquote. Few would ever consider it junk mail. Additionally, the U.S. Government Publishing Office, GPO, is the, quote, official digital and secure source for producing, protecting, preserving, and distributing the official publications and information products of the federal government, unquote. On a rush need for this kind of project, it's difficult to believe the GPO would redesign print envelopes and literature resembling junk mail, or permit the Money Network to find an envelope company to do the same. The plain white envelope containing the card did have a large treasury seal on the left side and a reading command that the mailer was, quote, not a bill or an advertisement, unquote. Inside were Money Network's two pieces of information: a slip informing my stimulus payment was in the Visa prepaid debit card affixed to the two-sided information sheet with vital referral URLs. The card provided a phone number for the authorization, but neither piece mentioned the number $600, quote unquote, which would have saved many from misunderstandings. In the text about withdrawal methods, the MetaBank rules and fees, and scam warnings was set in a 9-point sans serif font using justified lines with a 7-inch eye swing. All were typography's classic no-nos for the readability, and indicated recipients were not considered worth the expense of an additional page with larger type in serif fonts. So it was easy to see why millions accidentally tossed the mailer without opening it, or bothered to read the information sheet, or cut up the card. The rude awakening meant perhaps thousands calling MetaBank's customer service for a replacement, which, as in the case of loss or theft, required a garbage search to report the card's number. Complaints from eligible recipients failing to even get the mailer seemed to have been so numerous that on February 1st, 2021, the IRS dispatched a follow-up letter notice number 1444B to us, recommending that if it hadn't arrived within 7 days of receiving the letter, go to irs.government/ERP and click on Get My Payment, or call 800-191-9835. Well, we never got a follow-up letter. We never got any notice. I knew enough to call 800-191-9835, but when I did that, they had already sent out all the checks, and that whole process was done. Added to such aggravation was the assumption, once again, that all complainers had computers or electrical outlets for recharging cell phones for those lengthy waits between robotic responses directing keypad runarounds. Anyway, this is worth reading. I'm not going to go through the rest of it because of all the screw-ups. It ends with the statement, so let's hope the IRS and their vendors get distribution right on the upcoming $1,400 stimulus payments. The third time might well be the charm. But somehow I doubt it. I'm still expecting screw-ups. I'm not expecting screw-ups because it's done by the government. I'm expecting screw-ups because they're using private contractors instead of having government civil servants take care of it. In my experience is, I did spend some time in the government on a consulting basis. And my experience was, I worked at the Census Bureau for a while as a consultant. I worked for the Department of Agriculture for a longer period as a high-level consultant there some years ago. And my experience was then that the civil servants did not screw up a lot. They generally went home at 5 o'clock, which we consultants did not, of course. Sometimes I would tear my hair out over that because things were becoming due. But when they did work, they didn't make mistakes very often. They were pretty careful. I think in that way, they outperformed the private contractors by quite a bit. That was just one person's experience anyway. Sitting inside the government at a desk for a relatively long period of time. How many years was it altogether? 4 years, wasn't it? Yeah, 4 years inside that way. Anyway, what's next? I think I've shared the wrong thing. I'm not ready for this thing. So let me go back and share the other thing. There we go. This too is about screw-ups. This is Dave Dane's column on March 15th. Headlined, "Why Can Debt Collectors Take Your $1,400 Check?" He says, blame everyone. That's part of his headline. He said, one phrase you never hear from a journalist is, quote, "I forgot about this one," unquote. We're supposed to be all-knowing and all-seeing, and it's just not possible for things to slip our mind. But we had a collective slip on a critical issue involving the American Rescue Plan that didn't come to light until it was too late. I mentioned in last Friday's edition that the $1,400 payments can be garnished by private debt collectors who most certainly did so as the payments hit bank accounts starting over the weekend. First of all, my only advice to anyone evading a debt collector, many of whom might not know whether they have a debt judgment against them, is to take that money out of the bank as soon as it hits the account. A study from 2014 found that 1 in 3 adults have debt in collections, so the universe of people who might need to heed that advice is quite large. The bigger questions are, why did nobody realize this until last week, and what can Congress do about it now? I've been tracking this issue longer than most, going back to the first of the economic impact payments in the CARES Act, and I have to dole out blame to a lot of people. Both houses of Congress, the White House, our ridiculous legislating structure, the media, even myself. I didn't anticipate this happening because I thought it was a solved issue. Let's go back in time. The CARES Act included protections for its $1,200 payment from IRS garnishment or government seizure, except in the case of child support payments, but did not have a restriction on private debt collectors. There was language in the bill allowing the Treasury Department to write rules blocking the payments from debt collection, but they opted not to do so. Thank you, Steve Mnuchin. In fact, Treasury gave guidance to banks, enabling them to use the payments to offset existing debts from overdraft or delinquent consumer loans. This caused an outcry. Even the banking industry rallied to tell Congress to protect the emergency payments, which was a clever move. They didn't want the increased labor cost of transferring payments to debt collectors while they kept quiet about how they could take the money. Senators Ron Wyden and Chuck Grassley introduced a bill to protect the payments last May. It passed the Senate unanimously. Unbelievably, Nancy Pelosi's House never passed the bill because she's such a wonderful speaker, folks. Because they had included the protection language in the HEROES Act. And I guess they wanted to keep maximum pressure on Mitch. This was absurd, since Wyden Grassley dealt with payments that were already out the door. It's unknown how many people had their payments garnished because of Pelosi's stubbornness. But the pandemic did likely prevent one potential consequence: debt collectors filing judgments en masse that gave them access to debtors' bank accounts. With courts mostly not open, that was less likely to happen. Fast forward back to December, and the second relief bill with payments, this time $600. The protections do get into that bill. At that point, everyone, certainly me, lets their guard down. Congress figured out that if you send out emergency checks, you have to code it so debt collectors can't siphon the money off. Problem solved. Except the latest bill presented a problem. The budget reconciliation has special rules where everything must have a budgetary impact. Protecting the public's money from private debt collectors wouldn't qualify. I might want to take issue with that. If enough paychecks are garnished by the debt collectors, that money might very well not get into the economy, or it may be the case, because it may be the case that the debt collectors have a much lower marginal propensity to consume than the people the checks were intended for. And that then would be denying part of the multiplier effect of the economy, which in turn would be denying certain people jobs and salaries, which in turn would be having a budgetary impact on the federal government through the tax channel. So it seems to me you could make a case that it does have a budgetary impact. I don't know whether the CBO could score it, and this might be a problem, but it seems to me the causal chain here is pretty plain. Anyway, going on with Dave's piece. So the Senate had to leave that part out. At that point, there were a few options. They could try to pass Wyden Grassley again, as they unanimously did in the past, to protect all future economic impact payments. They could ask the House to pass that bill to put pressure on the Senate. They could ask the White House to highlight the issue, maybe work with banks and debt collectors to prevent it. Instead, none of this happens. If the Senate passes their bill with unprotected payments, it's not until March 8th, the day before House passage, that interest groups in the banking industry bring this to light. The House doesn't react, just passing the Senate bill, right? Because if you recall, they didn't want to take any more time in passing this bill. They wanted to get it out, get it signed by the president, so checks could start to flow. Of course, presumably not start to flow to the debt collectors, but it looks like part of that is what's happening. But anyway, the House didn't want to hold up the bill any longer. If they'd wanted to hold it up any longer, they might have given the progressives a chance to put back into the bill the minimum wage protection. If they had done that, then maybe we'd be seeing a much more satisfactory bill today. It might have taken another 2 weeks, but I don't know. Maybe it would have been worth it. The House doesn't react, just passing the Senate bill. The White House could have held up the payments until Congress passes language protecting them, because the way a debt judgment works is that as soon as money fills a targeted account, debt collectors can drain it. But instead, the IRS speeds through to start sending the money through direct deposit on the weekend. I have to admit, I wondered about that on Friday. I wondered how fast it was going to go through direct deposit. Well, we really didn't expect that from them because it hadn't happened the last time, right? But also, it was known that Wells Fargo wasn't going to credit accounts until Wednesday of this week. So that's another reason why it might not have happened for us over the weekend. So Wyden said, Wyden meanwhile announced on March 9th that he, quote, will be introducing standalone legislation to ensure families receive their much-needed relief payments, unquote. It's March 15th, and it hasn't been introduced. My sources in the Senate tell me Wyden's building support for the bill. But we're way too late here. Those with judgments have already been dinged or will be soon. Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase's delay until Wednesday on these payments is actually a good thing in this context, but only if Congress reaches a solution by then. Well, it's already Tuesday. I haven't heard of them reaching a solution. The only thing a legislative fix helps now is preventing a flood of new judgments, which is more possible under the relaxed environment of the pandemic. Then Dave then says, so we all failed. The media and interest groups didn't raise the issue soon enough. The Senate waited too long to make this a priority. The House has completely checked out. The White House is more interested in showing efficiency than protecting the payments. There's an undercurrent of commentary about how the Biden win brought competency back to Washington and how there's now a moment to act in the public interest. Well, there appears to be some residual cluelessness in D.C., and millions of debtors will pay the price. So Dave has a little note here on mistaken identity, which is about the Neera Tanden situation, which is worth going over also. When Neera Tanden's nomination hit the rock, Robert Kuttner of The Prospect, based on intel he had for a few months, pointed out that Gene Sperling, the veteran of the Clinton and Obama presidencies who had drifted left over the years, was the White House's top choice to take the job at the Office of Management and Budget. That news was confirmed last night, though Sperling isn't going to get the job. Sperling instead will become the point person for implementing the American Rescue Plan, but only because congressional leaders revolted when Biden predictably sought to make him the OMB director. Quote, the White House had indicated to lawmakers that it wanted him in the top slotted OMB political rights, but that quote received major pushback from the Hill because it wouldn't look good to, quote, name a white man to replace Tanden, who would have been the first Indian American to hold the position, unquote. Instead, it's very likely Shalanda Young, an African American congressional staffer, who's currently the deputy OMB nominee, will get the job. I don't have anything against Young. though I haven't heard by universally positive um, 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 I haven't heard a reaction that was universally positive. Sperling is not exactly perfect either, but this is a classic case of identity taking precedence over perspective and vision. And actually, it's more of a mask for the real agenda of congressional Democrats getting someone at OMB who shares their parochial interests. Dave says, I don't particularly care if it's a black woman using cost benefit analysis to weaken a methane gas regulation, okay, or a white man. I care about the regulation. ARP implementation is an important job. So you can say that all ends well here. But I wish ideas were more important, as do I. There's far too much identity politics getting played these days when we are in the middle of an existential crisis. So, next is another column by Dave. So let me share the screen for that one. This is today's column, and it's on the muddled infrastructure push. Okay, so what's coming next? Errors in the delivery of the stimulus checks. We know some of that is coming next. We know Gene Sperling is coming next to the implementation of the ARP. And here we come with rumored infrastructure. The Biden administration, oh, by the way, this was done at the American Prospect today by Dave Dayen. The Biden administration will spend the next couple of weeks selling the American Rescue Plan and hoping that its full suite of cabinet officials can get confirmed. It's kind of an interregnum period for lawmaking, though executive action is always available, as are majority vote Congressional Review Act resolutions. But what's next will be a question to be asked for the next couple weeks. The administration has signaled that they're interested in a big infrastructure package, paired with what's being called the first major tax increase since 1993. Any consideration that this would be a bipartisan package was dispelled by Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland on a hot mic yesterday. Quote, ultimately, it's going to be put together similar, unquote, to the ARP through the reconciliation process. Dave says the Democrats have fiscal year 2022 and 2023 reconciliation bills to use before the midterms. Well, not exactly. First, it seems to me there's still a reconciliation bill left over for fiscal 2021 because I remember that the last reconciliation bill used in fiscal 2020 was the tax bill by the Republicans, tax cut bill, that there was no reconciliation bill used in the first months of fiscal 2021, which were from October through December. So we've just had the first of the reconciliation bills just passed for fiscal 2021. Potentially, there are still two fiscal 2021 reconciliation bills that I believe are left for fiscal 2021. Then there are three possible bills for fiscal 2022. Okay, and if the Democrats can get enough done at the beginning of fiscal 2023, they could theoretically pass three reconciliation bills then also. Because even if they lose the Congress in the elections of 2022, they would still be in a position to ram through reconciliation bills in the first 3 months of fiscal 2023. So there you are. Looks to me like there are plenty of reconciliation bills left, maybe 8 of them. I may be wrong about that, but we'll see. I do think Dave is being a little too conservative here in his estimates. Speaker Pelosi has instructed committee chairs to work with their Republican counterparts on the package. And she has expressed, quote, hope for bipartisanship, saying that, quote, building roads and bridges and water supply systems and the rest has always been bipartisan, except when Republicans opposed it with the Democratic president as they did with President Obama, unquote. Dave says, I think that's your answer right there. Obstruction is the game plan. There's a bit of a ticking clock here because the usual surface transportation bill must be reauthorized by September, and that could become folded into this project. Then he says, similarities between the infrastructure package and the ARP kind of end with reconciliation. However, first, Democrats will have to agree on what counts as infrastructure. Then they'll have to agree on what tax measures to put in. All this could fracture a caucus with practically no room for error. Infrastructure, quote unquote, traditionally was what Nancy Pelosi mentioned above, roads and bridges and water systems. But the definition has expanded and should expand. How about electric vehicle charging stations? Necessary infrastructure as the vehicle fleet greens. What about broadband deployment? Or the electric grid and renewable arrays? Or improving schools and hospitals? Or building affordable housing? Or funding child care and in-home support services? The answer to all of this is really yes, quote unquote, but everyone has to agree. And by the way, if I may point out here, if you're going to pass these things through reconciliation, the parliamentarian is going to have to agree. So, since Biden respects the parliamentarian so much, it might be a good idea for Schumer to immediately get rid of her, so when the next reconciliation bills come up, there's a parliamentarian who will do what they're told, or what Congress, what the Senate tells them to do, what the majority leader of the Senate tells them to do. Maybe getting rid of this parliamentarian and hiring a crony of Chuck Schumer's might be a good idea. You certainly don't want the parliamentarian to exclude improvements to the electric grid and renewable arrays because she thinks that's not infrastructure. Or funding child care and in-home support services because that's not infrastructure and doesn't belong in an infrastructure reconciliation bill. Dave then says, then you have to deal with the, quote, old infrastructure standby, the Highway Trust Fund. In fact, I'm just going to add here, why don't you just get rid of the filibuster and get rid of this reconciliation nonsense? That's the main funding mechanism for the surface, and we'll take that up a little later, by the way. That's the main funding mechanism for the surface transportation bill. And the gas tax, which funds it, has not increased since 1993. Of course, raising gas taxes on people is going to be enormously popular, right? For people, you want to vote for the Democrats? You want to increase gas taxes? I don't think so. They are regressive taxes. At the same time, Democrats want to fuel the transition to electric cars, which in intention would bring the gas tax down to zero and eliminate federal highway funding. But the main alternative discussed, the vehicle miles travel tax, is unwieldy and hard to collect. Then you have to dole out the favors necessary to get the most reluctant of the Democrats on board. Earmarks have been restarted as a way to grease the wheels for a package like this, and in general, I'm fine with that. They don't create new money, just spray it around to different locations. But that push and pull is likely to be intense. He's right. That's going to be like a real food fight. Then you have to figure out what taxes to include. You don't, quote, have to do this, unquote, technically. But centrist Democrats are demanding at least partially paying for infrastructure. Senator Joe Manchin has made the odd request of both getting bipartisan support and increasing taxes on corporations and the wealthy, Dave says, which defies the laws of nature. He's right about that. But even as a Democratic-only bill, there will be fights over what taxes to include, how much to offset, whether to leverage private money through an infrastructure bank. In parentheses, a very delicate idea that could backfire spectacularly, close parens, and so on. There are trillions of dollars available just from reversing the worst elements of the Trump tax cuts or eliminating the step up in basis for wealthy heirs. Again, everyone must agree. Because of these minefields, you could see the bill split between spending measures and tax measures, though that could cause reconciliation problems. Everything could cause reconciliation problems. Get rid of that mess. Because of these layers of issues to be worked out, there's a bit of a vacuum legislatively right now. That's why you see Chuck Schumer freelancing with a China proposal, which is sort of orthogonal to the infrastructure push. It builds off a bill he had last year with Senator Todd Young from Indiana. He's a Republican, by the way. Spent $100 billion over 5 years at the National Science Foundation and gave another $10 billion for regional tech hubs. The idea is to infuse a homegrown advanced technology manufacturing industry, and because it sounds good, call it a, quote, confronting China, unquote, bill. That could combine with a number of other proposals from Democrats and Republicans, including on producing telecom hardware and rare earth minerals locally. The White House is on board, particularly since their timeline is muddled in a way you'd have thought it wouldn't be right now. Supply chain resilience definitely needs addressing, though it may be overstated to dump some science money somewhere and build a pop-up industrial policy. But I'm a little more unnerved by the lack of coherence from the administration on the next legislative lift. It's a work in progress. As mentioned above, there's way too much quiet in Washington about the Congressional Review Act, which can be used to nullify certain Trump-era regulations. And Politico picks up on this story, which we covered here last week, finding Democrats pretty hesitant to use the tool. There are excuses about being busy with the American Rescue Plan and a more insidious excuse that misreads the law. The CRA says any regulation overturned by Congress cannot appear in substantially the same form, and this would tie the hands of the regulators of Biden. That is untrue, and this Congressional Research Service report explains why. So here's Dave giving a CRS report to Congress people whose staff should have read it and saying, look at this report from the CRS. It tells you why it wouldn't tie the hands of Biden's regulators. Trump rewrote 2 rules that were overturned through CRA and wasn't challenged. Moreover, there's explicitly no judicial review on CRA, so Congress and the regulators have the discretion to determine what substantially the same form actually means. Creative thinking would surely prevent the tying of hands, but I fear Democrats are happy to use this as an excuse for inaction. But I'm more concerned about the lack of agency here. There's an April 4th deadline to introduce the CRA resolutions. Just one-line bills with the regulation to be repealed. Introducing the resolution doesn't mean it gets a vote, but it has to be done, and the House is about to leave town. There are claims in this story that Democrats are working on resolutions and having discussions. Do they not know they need to introduce them by April 4th? What is going on? He should have said, what the hell is going on? Incompetence again. So next, I had intended to go through a little piece by Nomi Prinz, but the problem is it's not a little piece. It's a big piece, and I don't have time for it today. It's not actually that big, come to think of it, but it's still a little too big. Okay, and I wanted to get to the filibuster, so I'm just going to commend it to you. I have the link. It's really, really an excellent piece on what kinds of infrastructure needs to be done. It goes through the American Society for Civil Engineers and what they say is needed. Now points out some estimates for upgrading our infrastructure now even run as high as $7 trillion. So I think you'll want to look at the detail of this article. It's really pretty important. I may go into it tomorrow night. I'll see whether I have the leeway to go into it tomorrow night. But right now, I'm not going to share it due to shortage of time. But I do want to get to the filibuster because that's coming next too. And it is coming next with respect to the infrastructure bill. If people cannot pull together, they cannot agree on a reconciliation bill, which is going to take an awful lot. That's going to take an awful lot of dickering among the Democrats. And they have nowhere near the space for dickering they had in 2009. And that was a disaster. That was a disaster in itself. Anyway, here's the next article. It's called "The Filibuster is a Labor Issue." It's by Hamilton Nolan and originally appeared in these Times. It's appearing as a column in Common Dreams on the 14th of March. There's a picture of Joe Manchin talking to the United Mine Workers of America at a union rally. By the way, the UMWA still supporting Joe Manchin. On Tuesday, the House passed the PRO Act, the sweeping labor law reform bill that would re-energize unions in America if it would have become law, which it will not as long as the filibuster remains in place in the Senate. The situation now is very simple, says Hamilton Nolan. Destroying the filibuster is a labor issue. The Senate, an anti-democratic institution by design that exists to squash the dreams of the majority of our nation's citizens, is evenly split, controlled by Democrats by only a single vote. It currently takes 60 votes to overcome a filibuster, meaning that 10 Republicans would have to join all of the Democrats to push through the PRO Act. There is zero chance of this happening. Frankly, I doubt that every Senate Democrat would even line up behind the PRO Act if the Chamber of Commerce lobbyists really started putting the screws on them. But that is purely academic at this point. On top of that, it is hard to imagine any congressional election in the coming decades that would change the composition of the Senate enough to allow the bill to pass with the filibuster in place. The PRO Act is not bullshit. It is serious, historic. That's in the article, by the way, not my editing. It is serious, historic pro-worker reform. That is something that is not now, will never be an issue that a large chunk of Republican senators will flock to support. The donors who pay to elect Republican senators, as a rule, are spending money to prevent a bill like this from ever passing. So here is where we are. Quote, organized labor went all out to get Joe Biden and Democratic Congress in place, and they know they're owed payback. B, the PRO Act is labor's highest priority. And C, the PRO Act has virtually no chance of becoming law as long as the filibuster stays in place. To be very gauche and transactional about all of this, words from Senate Democrats now about how pro-union they are do not mean anything at all if they are not accompanied by a commitment to end the filibuster. I would venture to say it is time to start painting Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the two most outspoken Democrats committed to preserving the filibuster, as anti-union. They will certainly protest, but reality tells its own truth. We need the PRO Act. There is only one way to get it. Being unwilling to do something completely within their power to get the bill passed is indistinguishable from being against the bill. And if you're against the bill, you're not pro-union. The filibuster is a barrier to progress in worker rights, just like union-busting law firms and greedy bosses are. A barrier is a barrier is a barrier. It is absurd to treat this barrier as sacrosanct and then declare that you are, nevertheless, strongly in support of doing the thing the barrier is preventing. Get real, says Hamilton Nolan. The AFL-CIO's executive board is meeting this week, and they are considering the possibility of taking a formal position on the filibuster. They should. AFL President Richard Trumka has said, quote, the PRO Act is our litmus test, unquote, which should imply that opposition to the filibuster is a litmus test as well. At this point, eliminating the filibuster is part and parcel of the progressive reforms that we are all trying to get passed. Claiming to support the PRO Act or a strong green infrastructure bill or the voting rights bill without supporting the end of the filibuster is like claiming to support going into a building but refusing to open the door. Assuming that you don't enjoy banging your head against the wall endlessly, you must do one in order to do the other. It's good that major unions are running publicity campaigns touting the PRO Act. It will also go down as a lot of wasted effort if we're not able to do away with the filibuster, as it seems rather futile to do all this work to promote a bill that will just languish in the Senate drawer. Ending the filibuster is a labor fight. It is an environmental fight. It is a healthcare fight. It is equivalent to the substance of all these issues themselves because it is the thing that enables them to happen. There is a coalition to be built on this issue of every progressive in America who wants tangible gains in the next 2 years that is broad and powerful enough to push the Democratic Party where it needs to go. Any Senate Democrats who don't like this ultimatum should consider themselves to be on the other side of working people, and we should be sure to tell them that loudly. Hamilton Nolan is a labor reporting fellow in these times. He has spent the past decade writing about labor and politics for Gawker, Splinter, The Guardian, and elsewhere. You can reach him at hamilton@inthesetimes.com. So now you know how to reach Hamilton. I think you'll agree with me. That was a pretty straightforward fire-eating post, right? With no need of cursing, by the way, except for the one-time use of bullshit. So here we are. From the week, a very short piece. Mitch McConnell darkly threatens, quote, scorched earth Senate if Democrats eliminate the filibuster. I got only one thing to say about that, folks. Bring it on, Mitch. Bring it on. Senate minority, and by the way, I have to say this to Rachel Bovard of Rising also, who seems to think that we can't get rid of the filibuster. It'll be worse. It'll be worse. Mitch will tie up everything because the Senate runs on unanimous consent. Everything can be tied up if there is no unanimous consent. What did Mitch say? He's turning up the pressure against some Democrats' efforts to eliminate the filibuster. Speaking on the Senate floor on Tuesday, he imagined the filibuster-free future, painting a grim picture. Quote, nobody serving in this chamber can even begin to imagine what a completely scorched earth Senate would look like, unquote, he said. Without the filibuster, he predicted the Senate would be, quote, a 100-car pileup, unquote, where, quote, nothing moves, unquote. Some Democrats are hoping to nix the filibuster, which requires a supermajority of 60 votes to pass most pieces, of legislation. The moderate Democrats and Republicans are opposed, and Politico's Burgess Everett described the blown-up filibuster as the GOP's, quote, biggest threat in the short term. Because of that concern, Mitch McConnell threatened to push a long list of conservative policies with, quote, zero input, unquote, from Democrats, if only a simple majority is required. He listed defunding Planned Parenthood, penalizing sanctuary cities, and a national right to work law. He continued by warning he'd require a quorum for everything, making a past action seem like, quote, child's play, unquote, reports Punchbowl News' Jake Sherman. Though it's unclear why McConnell would be opposed to more easily passing his legislative priorities, there are a few reasons Democrats may not be too worried by his threats regardless. NBC News' Benji Sarlin notes that many of these conservative policies don't have the support of 50-plus Republicans anyway, and the GOP didn't use every tool available to pass them, even when they held all three branches of government. The Washington Post's Dave Weigel separately argues that many Democrats may feel conservative courts hold the power on some of these issues, so Republican senators' posturing is irrelevant. Either way, analysts seem to agree with McConnell in his prediction of increased chaos and gridlock. with only 50 seats for each party. More frequent quorum requirements could get messy quickly and could lead to bill being passed out of pure spite, says Summer Meza, who wrote this piece today. It's one of their speed reading items. It was written at 12:43. Anyway, here's my take on it. Let's say the Democrats get rid of the filibuster and they pass H.R. 1 quickly, or they pass a minimum wage bill quickly, or they pass H.R. 1 with an amendment adding the minimum wage bill to it. And it's challenged by a point of order pointing out that the bill has been filibustered. And let's say the Democrats use the nuclear option to get rid of the filibuster. And they do. They go ahead with it. They get rid of it. They immediately pass that particular bill. Then they move to H.R. 4. Okay, and at that point, what do the Republicans do is they slow it down. They delay H.R. 4 by requiring a quorum call all through it and by denying every single request for unanimous consent. So every little motion has to be voted on. And that requires a quorum to be there and all the Democrats to be there. So what? So let's have all the Democrats there. So you say, well, they won't be available to raise funds for themselves. Well, if they're going to pass a minimum wage bill, and they're going to pass H.R. 1, and they're going to pass H.R. 4, and they're going to pass H.R. 51 and H.R. 52, and they're going to pass a minimum wage bill, and they're going to pass a huge infrastructure bill, and they're going to pass within the infrastructure bill various kinds of green bills, and they're going to pass a federal job guarantee. Who cares if they're available to raise money? Who cares? Do they think they're not going to win in 2022? It doesn't matter if they do that. It doesn't matter if they raise $1 for their campaigns in 2022. And by the way, they'll be able to raise all the dollars they need from small donors. What happens if they include in those bills monthly payouts until the end of the COVID crisis and for 1 year thereafter? For everybody in America. What happens if they pass Rashida Tlaib's ABC bill, and they include Presley's job guarantee bill inside of the infrastructure bill, as part of the infrastructure bill? Do they think they won't be able to raise all the money they need from small donors? I want the Republicans to bring on what they think is going to be the paralysis of the Senate. First of all, the House will be free to pass anything it wants to pass, and it'll be sending all these great bills to the Senate. And then what are the Republicans going to do? Are they going to stay off the floor and put one senator on the floor and force the Democrats to have all 50 senators there? I mean, what are they going to do? They cannot slow it down enough. They cannot do it. It is impossible. The big bills will overwhelmingly pass. They will have no say. They will have no input. They will have no bargaining. Their constituents will be at their throat. People will see them obstructing, nothing but obstructing. Every Republican running next year for the Senate will be defeated. How is McConnell going to avoid the image of pure obstruction? He could avoid that when he could obstruct things just by having someone push a button and send in an email filibuster. Yeah, that didn't get any publicity. That was ignored by the press. That wasn't a big deal. That didn't have any effect on any ratings. The press ignored it. He could play all the cute games he wants. But if he pulls that crap now, all will be revealed that they are interested in doing nothing except blocking legislation that will help the people. If he continues that for any length of time, let's say 6 months, the very existence of that party will be threatened. So what I say is, bring it on, Mitch. Bring it on. You ain't smart enough to do this and avoid the label of the total obstruction party. The top party, total obstruction party. That's what you'll do for the Republican Party. The party that should be destroyed out of total obstruction of the public interest. Well, that's my message for tonight. I'll move to consider your comments. Gee. And so, where did I stop? I stopped with Terry Facebooking something. And I stopped with Russia reboot. No, I stopped with Brian Boru was the last High King of a united Ireland. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Can you date that, Troy? What was the date? Lana says, hi, folks. And Lana asks, are they rolling out hashtag Medicare for All tomorrow? As far as I know, I thought they were going to roll it out at noon tomorrow, and they're going to do something, at 8 a.m. I think they're starting a news conference, at 8 a.m., but I think they're having a Zoom session to roll it out tomorrow at noon. I think I registered for that. I think it's Phoenix King. Anyway, it's somebody with the handle of PHX King says too. Then survival of the fittest will close them down. Then a financially responsible business owner paying livable wage can thrive in its place. Kay says, I'm half Irish and half German. Laugh out loud. Terry Burke says, Sorry, I scrolled down too fast. Terry Burke says, tons of people ready to leave their banks for not releasing their $1,400 earlier. Kay says, I haven't seen mine posted yet. And Ghost Start says, according to Lawrence O'Donnell, Putin might have also orchestrated a chemical weapons attack in Syria just to distract the media from his ties to Donald Trump. One cannot trust anything MSNBC says. Nothing. They're stenographers from whoever in the government wants to lie to them. Terry says tomorrow the banks will be releasing the money. Ghost Start says the stimulus cuts child poverty in half if you use Common Core math. Terry says, but if you use what the BLS thinks is the poverty level, Terry Burke says it doesn't look like the people who need it most, the homeless, but may not get anything this time. Still unclear, but so far nada. Kay says, I shared info to the Occupy homeless group I'm in for paperwork to help them try to get something. Troy says, I've been homeless once and very near to falling homeless a few other times in my life. Lana says, Dr. Joe and I were just discussing the ridiculous figures used as poverty level. Kay says, too many of us are on the brink, Troy. And Terry says, plastic cards weren't as frequent as paper checks. Yeah, we got paper checks. It would have been better for the poor to receive cards because check cashing fees are too high. Well, we were banked, so we just deposited it in our account. Didn't have any check cashing fees. Terry says, the joy is probably why Bonnie hasn't gotten her check, but possibly. No, I don't think that's it, because the first time they sent us $2,400 for a couple.
Both names are the same.
Were both names on it that time? Yeah. So both names are on it, okay, the first time around. But somehow, the second time around, they got information screwed up. They sent me a check with my name on it for $600. And they did not send a check, okay, with Bonnie's name on it. Bonnie says, hi, everyone.
I did that a couple times because it looked like it disappeared.
And Troy says, my homelessness only lasted a few months. I met a Navy SEAL that recognized me. I was never a SEAL, but I was a gunner and kept running into SEALs. And one of them befriended me, saw me on the street, and helped me out with a place to stay and a full-time job. Whoa, that was really great, Troy. That was great. Terry Burke said, same. And Bonnie says, hi, everyone. Kay says, hi, Bonnie. Terry says, hi, my favorite Mrs. Terry Burke says, solar power computer devices should be a thing. They should be. Solar powered calculators used to be a thing. Rick Maynard says, evening, everyone. And Rick says, show stuttering in and out. Take care, all. Rick says, I'll watch the recording later. Terry Burke says, or the federal government could provide solar chargers to those that don't have electric outlet availability. Does the federal government still do the free phones? I don't know. And Ghost Start sent an icon, which I can't read in this interface. And Ghost Start says, 8 now dead in shooting spree, apparently targeting massage parlors near Atlanta. But many or all the victims believed to be Asian females. Oh, that sounds really terrible. Lana says, that garnishment oversight has horrible consequences Certain states allow and some have banned. It should be completely done away with. Well, the point is, in the reconciliation bill, probably the parliamentarian would not have allowed it. So, what they had to do at the time was to pass a companion bill and dare the Republicans not to vote for it. They should have tried to pass a companion bill at the time. And by the way, if the Republicans demanded 60 votes for the companion bill, they should have used the nuclear option on that. On the companion bill, to pass it and get rid of the filibuster all at the same time. And they should have dared Manchin and Sinema to vote against that, so people in debt in their states wouldn't get their $1,400 checks. Lana says, debt collectors are going to hell. I am sure of it. They're evil. Lana says, are you saying Pelosi protected the debt collectors? Please tell me I heard that wrong. Well, I don't know whether she thought she was doing that. She probably thought she was putting pressure on the Republicans, and she just ignored the side effects. And Gostart says, Schumer says the Justice Department is conducting a legal review on whether Biden has the authority to issue blanket forgiveness on student debt. Well, that would be important. Of course, there are many very, very fine lawyers, not just very, very fine lawyers, but expert lawyers, including constitutional lawyers, who say he does have that authority. But, of course, he's going to go to the Department of Justice and try to get a ruling that says he doesn't have that authority. So you have to see what, Merrick Garland and his boys are going to decide. Alana says, well, that's good. If he's having the Justice Department actually review this formally, as opposed to just doing it, it means he's looking for a ruling that says you can't do it, it's not legal. Terry says, well, Congress is just going to have to send out more rescue money for the homeless and those that had their $1,400 garnished. Oh, you really think they're going to do that? And Troy says, oh, Patreon. I got to add Joseph M. Firestone, BRB. Thanks, Troy. And Terry says, yeah, why is Biden raising taxes? There's no risk of inflation. It's not about inflation. What he's talking about is raising taxes to at least somewhat pay for the infrastructure bill. And one reason why he wants to do that is because Manchin wants to do it. There still may be plenty of deficit financing there. In other words, we don't know how much the rise in taxes is going to cover. It may not cover the whole deficit. If he has any sense, it shouldn't cover the whole deficit. It should involve deficit spending. It shouldn't involve a whole pay for, because that would be deflationary. He doesn't want to do anything deflationary. Kay says, raising taxes on the rich. Troy says, okay, I already added you to my small list of Patreon people that I like to support with a few pesos or shekels or ducats. Thank you, Troy. Amber H.K. Grigo says, good evening, my lovelies. Terry says, hi, lovelier. Kay says, had to laugh when I saw a post from CNBC saying that Biden is canceling out the Reaganomics. Yeah, that's a laugh. Kay says, I hope he does, but not holding my breath on it. Amber says, wouldn't it be nice if the left and the right could come together to fight against stupid taxation proposals like this? Amber says, wouldn't it be nice if the left and the right... Yes, Amber, it would be good. Kay says, Amber, he wants to raise taxes on the rich. Kay says, the rich need to start paying their fair share. Amber says, oh, all I heard was gas tax. Taxing the rich is fine, except that Biden's administration frames the taxes as necessary for revenue. Yeah, they're probably going to continue to do that. But yes, most of the taxes that Biden is supposedly thinking of are going to be taxes on the rich. In fact, I heard on, where did I hear it today? But anyway, the word circulating is that no one that makes less than $400,000 would find their taxes raised, taxes increased. Amber says, let's tax the rich, but let's end the money myth that the federal government needs revenue. We try to end that money myth on Twitter today. We did have somebody named Kim Driver feeding that particular money myth because he evidently hadn't read Steph's paper on the subject. Kay says, we do need to tax the rich for more revenue. They do not operate on MMT yet. No, Kay. MMT is the way things work. So we don't need to tax the rich for any more revenue. Not now, not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, not 15 years ago, not 20 years ago, not 30 years ago, not even not even 40 years ago did we have to tax the rich for any more revenue. Okay, I've heard this more times than I can say, Amber H.K. Grigo. I beg to differ. MMT is not just the current and accurate description, of our economy. Stephanie Kelton characterizes MMT as a lens that we use to describe and characterize and analyze our economy. What does she mean by a lens? She means that MMT is basically a conceptual framework, but it has a lot of different components in it. If you want to know what those components are, then I have a blog on that subject in my blog series. What's the blog series called? The Job Guarantee and the MMT Core. And that blog series, which was originally posted in 4 places, is still available on Daily Cost today. And, okay, I cover this. I forget if it's in the 15th blog in this series or the 14th blog, but I will send you a link on it. Amber says, we need to tax the rich because they're too rich, not because the federal government needs their money for spending. Exactly, Amber, exactly. And Terry says, hens supporting the Fox miners for Manchin. Kay says, I know, but the government doesn't do it yet. Amber says, the government doesn't do what yet? Tax the rich? They definitely don't get taxed enough, that's for sure. That doesn't mean that MMT isn't already here. It is, and it has been here for decades, yes. Since 1971, when Nixon went off the gold standard. Kay says, I'm saying the government doesn't use MMT or even admit, it is even used. Well, that's true. In other words, it does not it does not base its policy decisions on what MMT has to say. Amber says, I understand exactly what you're saying when I'm telling you is MMT is just the lens by which we view the economy. The lens, yes, that's it. It's not something that you implement or take away. No, it's the lens. It's not the current and accurate description of how our economy works today, Amber. Okay, it is the lens. That lens can be used in different ways by different people. It's possible for someone to use that lens and to make a mistake in their description of the economy. And it's possible for the most knowledgeable of the MMTers to say something inaccurate concerning the economy, because MMT is a lens. It's not a complete description of the economy and how it works today. Some MMT propositions may prove to be wrong. I personally cannot find a proposition advanced by the MMT framework that I think is wrong today. And I don't think that anyone has found one that is wrong, even though some people think they have found one or more that are wrong. But even if none are wrong thus far, some wrong statement or proposition may be found tomorrow. Kay says, I agree, but we aren't president or Congress or the Senate. Amber says, agreed, but not the point. Kay says, I guess I'm not sure what you're saying, sorry. And Terry says, that's what Manchin is, bullshit. Troy says, I'm listening. You had a long pause. Okay, you're back. Terry says, this is Obama's fault. And Mitch McConnell, what a drama queen. Yep. But Mitch McConnell drinks Spite because the people drink Sprite. Kay says Medicare for All is being introduced again tomorrow, too. Troy says, love your energy. Amber says, that's okay. We're all here to learn. Amber gives a YouTube link. And Lana says, where do you go to register for the Zoom call for Medicare for All? I will find the link again and post it. Troy says, I could only see my comments on this Facebook app on the Amazon Fire 7 tablet. And Ghostart says, my very old solar calc still works. Just dust it off, says Steve Gonzo, Ghostart. On YouTube, Terry says Democrats have to start being cutthroats to fight those Republican cutthroats. No, they just have to be tough. That's all. They don't have to be cutthroats. They just have to be tough. Lana says, okay, that's not good. I didn't realize he was looking for a way out. Well, he probably is. He's always... It's sort of a maxim that presidents, even when they're not explicitly looking for a way out, will say, okay, they will look for a way out, even if they're not looking for a way out. If you don't understand what they mean, they're looking to maintain maximum flexibility for decision making at all times. They don't like to be boxed in. They like to be able to change their decision right up to the final second. So they like to avoid making ironclad commitments. So right now, it looks like Biden is boxed in because legal opinion is overwhelmingly in favor of the notion that he has complete authority to cancel student debt. He doesn't want to keep on saying no to using that. without some dissent from a legal authority. So he's looking for that kind of excuse. Kay says, I know that, Joe, but they don't say it. Yeah, and that's true, Kay, and there are many of them who don't even know it. There are many people inside of the government who do not know or do not accept the lens, okay, that MNT is offering and the propositions that are expressed using that particular lens. Kay says, but Medicare for all would give us all freedom to go live and work wherever we want to. It would be a big, big help. It would be a big, big help. It would be freedom to go live and work wherever we want to inside of the United States. Yes. Yes. We would not be dependent on insurance companies and their networks and their plans and the areas they cover. Terry says, that's what the purpose of the parliamentarian is. Yes, a convenient excuse. But the excuse provided by the parliamentarian is not as powerful as the excuse, okay, that is provided by the Justice Department. The Justice Department has far more authority over the executive branch than the parliamentarian has over the Senate. The parliamentarians, the authority of the parliamentarians over the Senate have been ignored time and time again since the Byrd Rule was passed. The parliamentarian was routinely ignored by Humphrey when he was the vice president. And the parliamentarian was ignored by other vice presidents too. The advice of the parliamentarian was ignored by the Republicans when they wanted to pass the tax cut in, was it 2003, I believe. In fact, they fired the parliamentarian in that instance and appointed a parliamentarian who would say what they wanted the parliamentarian to say. Kay says, I know that, Joe, but they don't say it. Yes, Kay. Okay, I do agree with that. Okay, I think I've caught up. So, I think I'm done for the evening, except for giving you some links, which I'll come back and give you. Kay says, thank you, Joe and all, for a very great discussion again. I love you all. Terry says, but we love you too, Kay. And Terry says, I'd love to get a text or email from the employment office to come to Texas to help pack Fled Cruz's back because he's moving to Cancun, paying $15 an hour. Hashtag FJG, laugh out loud. Dolores says, thank you and good night all. Thank you, Dolores. Thank you for being here, folks. Thank you for staying. I'll see you tomorrow night. Hope you enjoyed this live stream.